Once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in Guyana over the past week or so. And as is the norm, we have tonight a number of important issues to discuss. I want to begin by welcoming our viewers who are joining us on television from West Coast Berbice, Region Number 5. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To our viewers who are joining us on television from Region 6, East Berbice, and along the Quarantine Coast, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To our listeners and viewers who are joining us on Freedom Radio from Robb Street, Georgetown, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And last but not least, to the thousands of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. Those of you who are joining us across the length and breadth of Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, and even further afield, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And please ensure that you share this program, ensure that you press that share button on your screen, on your telephone, on your iPad, or whatever device you're using to watch the program. Share it so that all your friends and all your followers can join us in tonight's discussion. Tonight is a special program, but before I get into the program itself, I want to share with you the information that you would have received already, that the learned magistrate assigned to conduct the trial in the elections fraud case has now signaled to the lawyers involved that she will not be hearing the case for the next 30 days. You will recall that it took nearly 3 years before a date was fixed for the trial of this matter. The prosecution had to endure all manner of delaying tactics, and after 3 long years, finally we got a magistrate assigned and a date fixed for the hearing and determination of these cases. The trial began, and you would have read in the newspapers and saw in the news the difficulties that were being confronted as the trial unfolded. Last Sunday, the lawyers received a message that the magistrate would be ill on Monday and Tuesday. And this afternoon, I am informed that another message was received that the magistrate would be ill for the next 30 days, so the trial is adjourned. I am not saying anything, because when I say anything, it is being interpreted as an attack on the judiciary and on the magistracy. You are free to draw your own inferences. You have been following this case from the institution of the charges and the factual narrative that surrounds the way this case has, or these cases have unfolded, are familiar to you. So I don't need to offer my views. You are to draw your own inferences. But I'll move on. Tonight I want to deal with the Alliance for Change and its leader, Mr. Nigel Hughes. Mr. Hughes is now a full-fledged politician. He is now the leader of the Alliance for Change. He says that he would like to be president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and by those postures and those pronouncements, he has automatically opened himself for scrutiny and public examination. And that is what I plan to deal with tonight. Now, you would have heard the allegations of conflicts of interests made against Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes glibly says that he is not guilty of these allegations. He is not guilty of conflicts of interests. And I want to dwell a little tonight on conflict of interest and Mr. Hughes and the Alliance for Change. Much have been said already. Much is in the public domain. I will add my few cents tonight. And I want to begin by sharing with you a definition of what conflict of interest is in the political sphere, not the legal sphere for the time being, in the political sphere. And I want to share with you a definition that was coined by a man named Richard Painter in an article, Getting the Government America Deserves, How Ethics Reform Can Make a Difference, published by Oxford University Press. And this is what the author says. Regulating conflict of interest in government is one of the aims of political ethics. I repeat, regulating conflict of interest in government is one of the aims of political ethics. Public officials are expected to put service to the public and their constituency ahead of their personal interests. Let me repeat that. Public officials are expected to put service to the public and their constituents ahead of their personal interests. Conflict of interest rules are intended to prevent officials from making decisions in circumstances that could reasonably be perceived as violating this duty of office. Conflict of interest rules are intended to prevent officials from making decisions in circumstances that could reasonably be perceived as violating this duty of office. So what this author is saying is that conflict of interest, first of all, and rules regarding conflict of interest is one of the main pillars of ethics in politics. You see, we have a bad perception of what politics is. Politics is not necessarily bad. Politicians make politics bad. Politics can be a very ethical thing. And in order to prevent unethical politics, the rules of conflict of interests have been crafted. And the main rule is that public officials, the politicians, are expected to put service to the public and their constituents ahead of their personal interests. Conflict of interest rules are intended to prevent officials, prevent politicians from making decisions in circumstances that could reasonably be perceived as violating this duty of office. So when you make decisions that violate your duty in office, and your duty in office is the public, then you are guilty of conflict of interest. Now let's apply those principles now to Mr. Hughes and ExxonMobil. So it is common ground that Mr. Nigel Hughes is the lawyer for ExxonMobil and its co-venturers, the oil companies. He's the lawyer for them. He has admitted that publicly. He has been the lawyer for them since before the contract was signed in 2016. At the time when the contract was signed in 2016, he was the chairman of the Alliance for Change. So he was lawyer for Exxon and the co-venturers, and he was also chairman of the Alliance for Change. Raphael Trotman, who was at that time the leader of the Alliance for Change, is the minister who signed the contract. So the chairman of the party is advising the oil company and is the lawyer for the oil company, and the leader of the very party is representing the government of Guyana. So the general secretary of the party, representing the oil company, and the minister who is signing the contract is also leader of the same party. Yet, Mr. Nigel Hughes does not see a conflict of interest. If I cannot find a better case of conflict of interest. The government of Guyana is on one side, Raphael Trotman is on that side. The duty of the government of Guyana is to get the best possible deal under this contract. And this government is represented by Raphael Trotman, the leader of the AFC. The party on the other side, who wants a better deal for themselves, which by itself is in conflict with the government, because the government wants the best deal possible, and the company wants the best deal possible. But Nigel Hughes is advising the company, and the leader of his political party is representing the government. So are you not seeing a conflict? Or is it a coincidence of interest where they are both acting for the company? And when you look at the terms of the contract and the lopsided nature of the contract, then maybe that is what it is. Maybe that is what it is. That the two of them conspired and came up with a contract in the manner in which that contract was crafted. There cannot be a more rank case of conflict of interest than what I am describing here. And I'll move on. Mr. Raphael Trotman, who claims that he was instructed to sign this contract, and after they lost government, offered to renegotiate this contract, and that by itself got its own problem. This is the gentleman who negotiated the lopsided contract in the first place, and now he's offering to renegotiate. If he is the one who did the damage in the first place, is it sensible to allow him to renegotiate? Will it produce a different outcome or a worse outcome? But that is not the issue, or that alone is not the issue. This very gentleman reappears now and is back in the AFC. I believe he is now the chairman of the AFC. He is now back in the executive of the very AFC. The man who negotiated the worst contract in the history of Guyana is back in the leadership of the AFC with his sidekick, Nigel Hughes, again. And Mr. Nigel Hughes does not deny that he is acting as lawyer for the oil company. He tells us that he is the lawyer, and instead, after he's elevated to leader of the AFC, one would have expected that the announcement that would have come would have been that as leader of the AFC, I can no longer act as lawyers for the oil company, as a lawyer for the oil company, because I can't serve two masters. Instead, the gentleman tells us that he will continue to be the lawyer for the oil companies, and that in matters concerning the oil company, he will not have a say, because he will continue to be advisor to the oil companies. This is a gentleman who tells us that he is into politics because of our newfound wealth. This newfound wealth is because of the oil and gas industry. And he is now putting himself up for elections because he wants to see this newfound wealth be shared equitably among the Guyanese. In other words, he wants more out of the oil and gas industry for the Guyanese people. Noble ideals. He believes that the Guyanese people can get much more out of the oil and gas industry. And he is in politics singularly because he wants to see this equitable distribution of the oil wealth take place among all Guyanese. Isn't that what he said? But instead of siding with the people, instead of standing on the side of the people, whom he claims he wants to see more money be distributed to from the very oil and gas sector, he stands on the side of the oil companies. So I don't know how he will be legally advising the oil companies to increase their profits, because that is what a lawyer has to do. That is part of his portfolio, advising his clients in every way possible so that they can make greater profits, and advising them against the people of Guyana, advising them against the government. But this gentleman, while he's doing that, is telling us that he will ensure that we get more from the oil company so that more Guyanese can become wealthy and we can share more equitably in the revenue generated from the very clients that he has to advise don't give more. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you see how conflicted this position is? And the man tells us that not only is he in bed with the oil company, but he will remain in bed with them. He's not going to leave. He will remain in bed with them against the Guyanese people. While at the same time, at the other corner of his mouth, he wants more revenue to be distributed to the Guyanese people. You see the conflict? Let me go back to the definition. Public officials are expected to put service to public and their constituents ahead of their personal interests. Mr. Hughes is turning this principle upside down. He is putting his personal interests first, over and above the interest of his constituents. That is why I started with that definition. Remember, he's not doing voluntary work for the oil companies. He's being paid presumably handsomely by the oil companies. And he wants to continue to draw that revenue and at the same time duplicitously pretend to represent the interest of the Guyanese people. I have joined certain legal proceedings involving the oil company, not because I want to protect the oil company's interest, because I want to protect the state's interest. But my joinder of those proceedings have been perceived by a few people to be in that I am in bed and the government is in bed with the oil company. That is what the Radzik sisters, the Shalina Nagir, the Glenn Lal, the Transparency International, the Melinda Janki, and all those people have accused me and the government of. And we are protecting the state's interest, the government's interest. But because we are on the same side of a case with ExxonMobil, we have been accused of being in bed with ExxonMobil. Nigel Hughes is in bed with ExxonMobil and tells you that he will remain in bed with ExxonMobil until you elect him president. And I am not hearing a word from Glenn Lal, from Radzik, from Janki, from Transparency International, and all these advocates. This is a man who is telling you, this is where I am, and I will stay there. How can you be the leader of a political party? The main revenue stream, the main economic activity in the country is oil and gas. You want to represent the oil and gas company, not the population. And you're telling people that to their face. And then with a straight face, say that that is not a conflict of interest. Well, if that is not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. How can you be a political leader of a party and say that you will not comment on the main economic activity of the country? You will not comment or you will not get involved in the main economic activity in the country. How is that possible? But you are involved. You're just not involved on representing the people. You are involved. But you are involved as lawyer advising the oil companies. Is that you're not involved? So when Nigel Hughes says that he is not involved, he is involved because he is the lawyer for the oil and gas companies. But I don't know how. And that's a matter for the population. How will you repose trust and confidence in a leader who says that he will not comment and be part of the main economic activity of a country, the main revenue stream of the country, but yet he's in politics because of that. Because of that main activity, because he wants to distribute the wealth more equitably across the country. The conflict and collision is deafening. And this is a gentleman who says that he's not in conflict. And he wants you to take him seriously. He wants you to take him seriously. And it doesn't end there. That's only one aspect of Mr. Hughes's position that is odd and bizarre. I want to take you back to March 2023. March 2023. A gentleman by the name of Brian Hamilton was shot and killed during a robbery at a gas station he owned in Buxton. Mr. Nigel Hughes said that he was the family lawyer for the Hamilton family. He was the family lawyer of the Hamilton's family. Brian Hamilton was shot and killed at a gas station. At the time, Mr. Hughes was president of the Guyana Bar Association. Mr. Hughes turned up at the crime scene and removed a CCTV camera, a video recorded tape that would have recorded what transpired, removed it, and kept it for several hours. When the information became public, he said that he was given permission by a police officer to do so. That turned out to be inaccurate. No police officer was identified and none came forward saying that they ever gave him permission. In fact, the police denied that they ever gave him permission to remove that tape. Why was that tape removed? That tape may have recorded who shot Brian Hamilton. This gentleman, purporting to be the lawyer for the family, removed that tape. So, you see the conflict again? You see the conflict again? As lawyer for the family, and that's how he turned up there. As lawyer for the family, he removed critical evidential material from the scene of the crime. Whose interest was he representing? And you know that he is one of the leading defense counsel in criminal matters in the country. You know that he has represented persons charged with the most violent offenses in this country. So whose interest really was he representing when he removed that tape? And these things are matters of public record. Matters of public record. Fast forward to August 2013, the Lusignan massacre. Mr. Hughes, as I said, he appears for those who are charged with the most brutal of criminal offenses. He appears for those who are charged with the most brutal of criminal offenses. In the Lusignan massacre, 13 people, including women and children, were slaughtered in their beds. Mr. Hughes could have chosen to prosecute. He could have chosen to be on the right side or on a different side in the law. But Mr. Hughes chose to appear for one of the accused persons. And I suppose that is his right. But that is the fact. So he chose to appear for one of the persons charged with the slaughter of 13 people in Lusignan, in their beds, including women and children. That is the position he chose. During the trial, or before the trial, the judge, because this thing was such a huge travesty and tragedy, and because so many people were involved, the judge at the time carried out a special procedure. The judge held an inquiry inquiring whether any of the lawyers involved, in prosecutors and defense counsel, whether they knew any members of the deceased or the deceased relatives. That was the first inquiry. Because there were so many people involved, the judge decided to do that in the interest of justice, to unearth any conflicts. And you note every time I'm using the word conflicts. So that was the first inquiry, whether any of the lawyers, defense counsel, or prosecutors knew any member of the deceased families or any relatives. That was the first inquiry. The second inquiry was whether any of the jurors knew any of the deceased or any relatives of the deceased. And the third inquiry was whether any of the jurors knew any of the lawyers. Mr. Hughes participated in all those processes. When the trial was concluded, it was disclosed that the foreman of the jury, his name is Vernon Griffith, he was the foreman of the jury. It was subsequently discovered that this gentleman was Mr. Hughes's client in a civil case that lasted 6 years. 6 years Mr. Hughes appeared for Mr. Vernon Griffith in a civil case. 6 years. And did not disclose that to the judge. Can you know a person for 6 years? Work for a person for 6 years and don't remember that person? You translate that in your everyday life. Can you work with a person for 6 years? The person and you are close. Lawyers sit on a table and the person sit on the other side because you have to write and take instructions. You have to go to court. You have to prepare this person if they're going to testify in a trial. You get very close to your clients. 6 years that relationship lasted. Is it a lapse of memory that Mr. Hughes couldn't recognize the foreman of the jury? As it turned out, they had that relationship that lasted for 6 years. The juror was banned by the judge for life. The juror was banned by the judge for life. Then I come to 2013 again. Remember the Amaila Falls hydro project? Remember that project? The Amaila Falls hydro project? The name of the company was Amaila Falls Hydro Inc., a company I believe owned by a man named Phip Motilal. This man was the subject, or this company was the subject of such public ridicule. Every single day in the front page of the Kaijur News, this company featured. Every single day. While Mr. Hughes would have been in the leadership of the AFC, while he would have been in the leadership of the AFC as chairman of the AFC went to the parliament. His wife was a parliamentarian, Miss Cathy Hughes. And they voted down this Amaila Fall project. They voted down this project. They maligned this company. And this was every single day in the news. And lo and behold, it turned out that Nigel Hughes was the company secretary for this company. You see the conflict again? Nigel Hughes was the company secretary for Amaila Falls Hydro Inc. Never disclosed it. While his wife and his party voting against this very company in the parliament. His wife company was also the PR outfit for the Amaila Falls project. You see conflicts and collisions? It was when this information became public, then I believe he tendered his resignation as chairman of the AFC or something like that. Check back the news. Kemraj Ramjatan was so embarrassed. Kemraj Ramjatan was so embarrassed that he said that he was unaware. He didn't have a clue. He didn't have a clue. That was the word he used in the newspapers. Check the Kaijo news. Ramjatan said he didn't have a clue that Hughes was the company secretary. And then Mr. David Patterson, the Alliance for Change General Secretary, refused to accept Mr. Hughes' resignation as chairman. They refused to accept his resignation as chairman, the same AFC. All this information that I'm sharing are in the newspapers. So after Nigel Hughes would have hid that information, that he was the company secretary, not only from the Guyanese public, but from his own party, when he tendered his resignation, they said, no, it's okay. And they continued with him. Then I come to October 2012, just after you had that incident in Linden. Remember, you had that incident in Linden where people were shot because of protests, when the government had decided that they will raise the electricity tariff after the opposition led by Mr. Granger agreed that the tariff must go up. Mr. Hughes called for the resignation of Clement Rohi, who was the Minister of Home Affairs. And he gave President Donald Ramotar an ultimatum, saying that if Rohi doesn't resign within X period of time, we will have massive demonstration. And of course, President Ramotar ignored him. And all of you would remember the violence at Agricola that afternoon, where thousands of persons had to endure inconvenience. There was violence, there was assault, there was sexual molestations because the public road at Agricola was blocked. Nigel Hughes must take credit for that as well. And I'm not finished. I'm not finished. And then, how can we forget Mr. Hughes' infamous legal theory that he sold to the APNU AFC, that 33 is not a majority of 65. It is Mr. Nigel Hughes who pronounced and propounded this famous legal theory first, and he sold it to the APNU AFC government, who were so desperate that they bought it. Of course, Nigel Hughes was smart enough not to go to the court to argue it, but he set up all of them and he sent them on a wild goose chase. So that is the man. I heard him say that I am taking a judge to the Judicial Service Commission because of the judge's decision. I never said any such thing. I was complaining about statements that the judge made in the course of his judgment. I would take a judge to the Judicial Service Commission because of a decision. I will appeal the decision. But that is the level of the man's legal reasoning. In the same way, he thought that 33 is not a majority of 65, is the same way he reasoned that I said that the decision of the judge will be challenged in the Judicial Service Commission. And then we come to recently. They spoke about the crime wave, and they want to call a protest in relation to the crime wave. The AFC, they talk about the high crime rate, and they talk about calling a protest against the high crime wave. But guess who is the leading criminal lawyer in the country? Mr. Conflict of Interest himself, Nigel Hughes. I spoke about ethics. He will not stop doing criminal law. He will not stop drawing the proceeds from the clients when they are charged with the very crime that he's complaining about. He takes their money, represents them on the one hand, wearing one cap, takes off the cap, and goes to the population and says the crime wave is unacceptable. The crime wave is unacceptable. But he goes back in the afternoon and he draws. He accepts money from those who are charged with perpetrating the crime. He does that in the afternoon, and in the next morning he complains about the crime wave. The epitome of conflict of interest. I used to do criminal law too. And that is one of the main problems that Ramjatan got in the PPP. That was his first problem. Because they asked him to stop doing criminal matters. Because the PPP can't complain about crime and criminality in the country, and one of the leaders representing persons charged with criminal conduct. And don't tell me about presumption of innocence. I know all of that. I know all of that. And the people are entitled to legal representation and they are presumed innocent. I know that. It doesn't mean that you have to take the case. If you want to take a position on crime, you can't appear for those who are charged with criminal offenses. That is a conflict. I had to make a decision. I could have continued as a criminal lawyer. But because of the ethics of politics, because of morality, I said, you know what? I can be part of a party who stands strong against crime, and as a leader of that party, I am defending criminals. I know they're entitled to representation. I know they are presumed to be innocent. But I don't have to be it. I don't have to do it. Mr. Hughes wants to have both. He wants to eat his cake and have it. And it brings me to the election fraud cases. Now again, democracy is the lifeblood of any nation. The CCJ said that in one of the election cases. Democracy is the lifeblood of any nation. Democracy is freedom. The lack of democracy is the lack of freedom. We lived through lack of democracy in Guyana. We know what lack of democracy brings. Look at what is going on in Venezuela. Chaos, mayhem. 10 million refugees already fled the country. That is what the lack of democracy does. Any politician worth his salt, any decent politician would stand on the side of democracy. Look at the election fraud cases. Where does Mr. Nigel Hughes stand? He could have been prosecuting and he could have been serving the cause of democracy. He could have been sitting on the fence and said, you know what, I'm not going to get involved. Where does he choose to be? Where does he choose to be? He chooses to be the representative and the lead representative of those charged with attempting to rig the elections. You see where he stands? As I said, he could have been on the other side, or he could have not been in the case at all. But he chooses that side. So if you want to know, he's a new leader. That's how he presents himself. He's a visionary. Well, if you want to know where he stands on democracy, that is where he stood. And that is where he stands. And you and I know that we don't need a court to tell us what we saw for 5 months from March to August 2020. I don't know whether you need a court to tell you that. I experienced it. I lived it. I saw it with my eyes. I lived it. I breathed it. You think I need a magistrate or a judge to tell me what I saw? But there's a system. And that's how the system works. But speaking for myself and the tens of thousands of you who saw with your own eyes and who were part of the process following it from whichever part of the world you are living, you know what you saw. Every major international observers that witnessed those processes issued a statement saying what they saw. OAS, CARICOM, Commonwealth, UNDP, United Nations, European Union, all of them issued statements. 100 countries across the globe, as I said recently, witnessed that, and they condemned it. Nigel Hughes didn't see it. You don't think he knows what transpired? You don't think so? Let us say he was not active in politics at the time. You don't think he knew? You don't think he could have stayed quiet with the no confidence motion? You think he had to go and tell them and try to help? You think he didn't see? For 5 months, the attempts at rigging? Yet, where does he stand? Which side did he choose? As I said, he could have sat on the fence. He could have said, I'm not getting involved. I was not part of it. His wife was very much part of it. His party was very much part of it. And now, if you are in doubt, he is demonstrating to you where he stands. He stands on the side of those who are charged. As I said before, I don't know whether you need a court to tell you what you saw and what you lived through. So, my friends, we are up now already on program time, and I have much more to go. I have much more information to share, but I thought that I will spend some time to discuss Mr. Hughes with you, since he is now part and parcel of the political landscape, and he has volunteered himself up for public scrutiny. I decided to share some information that you might find useful in assessing his credibility and personality. My operator is signaling to me that we have now approached program time. I want to thank you very much for spending the last hour or so with me. I think we have covered a lot of ground, and I hope that I would have provided you with some useful information that will guide you in and for the future. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening and stay healthy until we meet again next week. Thank you.